The voice that tells our stories is often the quietest one in the room. It's the whisper of memory, the ghost of a feeling, the echo of a slamming door from 50 years ago. This is a story about one such whisper. A whisper that became a plan. A story about a house, a betrayal, and the quiet, patient strength of an 80-year-old woman who decided that her story was not yet over. The sound that defined Ilara's new life was not a sound at all, but a hollow, antiseptic silence. It was the silence of the hallway outside her room at Golden Years Assisted Living, a silence punctuated only by the distant, tinny laughter of a game show from another resident's television, or the soft, squeaking tread of a nurse's rubber-soled shoes. It was a silence that swallowed noise, and memory, and spirit. Ilara would sit in her armchair, a relic she'd fought to bring from her old home, and run her fingers over the worn fabric. The chair held the imprint of a lifetime, of a husband, now gone, of children, now grown, of a self she could barely remember. She was 80. Her body was a map of faint aches and slow betrayals. Her knees complained on stairs, her hands, once so capable, now held a faint, constant tremor. But her mind was a sharp, clear pane of glass. And that was the greatest cruelty of this place. They treated her clarity as a symptom to be managed, her memories as artifacts to be humored. "Now, Ilara, you remember where the dining hall is, don't you?" they would say, their voices dripping with a sugary, condescending patience. The betrayal had been a slow, quiet earthquake. It hadn't been a single dramatic event, but a series of small tremors. A missed birthday phone call from her son, David. A Christmas visit from her daughter, Sarah, that felt rushed, perfunctory. Conversations that began to revolve around practicalities and best interests. They'd used the fall as the final excuse. A simple misstep on the porch of her beloved home on Maple Street, a sprained wrist, a night in the hospital. And then the orchestrated campaign. "Mom, you can't live alone anymore," David had said, his voice the reasonable managerial tone he used in his corporate job. He stood in her living room, a stranger in the space she'd built. "It's not safe." Sarah, wringing her hands, had added, "We worry about you all the time, Mom. At Golden Years, you'll have people around. You'll have activities. It'll be a community." The word community tasted like ash in Ilara's mouth. The final blow was the house. Her house. The one she and Arthur had bought with a young couple's desperate, hopeful love. The one where they'd painted walls and planted a garden and brought 2 children into the world. The one where she'd held Arthur's hand as he took his last, ragged breath. David, as executor of the estate, had handled it, sold it. Quickly, efficiently. To a young family, he said. A good price, he said. The proceeds would pay for her care, he said. She'd signed the papers in a fog of grief and medication, the pen feeling like a lead weight in her hand. She felt erased. Her home, the physical manifestation of her entire adult life, was gone. And in its place was this room, this silence, this slow waiting for the end. It was during one of their dutiful Sunday visits, all 3 of them crowded into her small room, David, Sarah, and their respective spouses, that the catalyst came. Sarah was chattering, filling the silence with nervous energy. "And you'll never guess who bought the house on Maple Street, Mom. The Millers, from 2 streets over. Their daughter, Chloe, and her husband. They have that adorable little boy, Leo. He's just started walking. It's so wonderful to see a young family in the old place. It just brings it to life again." David nodded, a satisfied smile on his face. "See, Mom. It's for the best. The circle of life." Ilara said nothing. She simply looked at her children. She saw the relief in their eyes. The burden lifted. They had tidied her away, like a piece of old furniture that no longer fit the decor of their busy, important lives. They had not just sold a house. They had sold her history, her sovereignty, her right to decide her own ending. And in that moment, a cold, hard seed took root in the fertile soil of her heart. It was not anger, not yet. It was a resolve, clear and absolute. The next day, She asked to see the facility's financial advisor. She spoke with a voice they hadn't heard before, stripped of its elderly quaver, laced with steel. She reviewed her accounts, the money from the sale of her house. There was more than she'd thought. Arthur's life insurance, his prudent investments. David had been thorough, but he hadn't accounted for everything. She had her own savings, a secret nest egg Arthur had always told her to keep, just in case. Just in case of what? She'd asked. Just in case, he'd said with a wink. Now she knew. She made a phone call to a real estate agent whose name she remembered from a decades-old favor. She used a voice that brooked no argument. She inquired about a property. Not her old property. The one directly across the street. Number 221, Maple Street. It was a smaller, slightly neglected Cape Cod that had been on the market for a while. The owner was motivated. A week later, she arranged for a taxi. She told the staff she was going to a doctor's appointment. It was the first lie she'd told in years, and it felt like a sip of cool water. The taxi drove through the familiar streets, the trees a blaze of autumn fire. And then, there it was. Maple Street. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild, caged bird seeing the sky. Her old house, number 224, looked different. A bright, modern porch swing. A plastic tricycle on the lawn. The curtains she'd sewn herself were gone, replaced by stark, white blinds. It was still her house, but it wasn't. And across the street, number 221. It looked tired, its paint peeling, the garden a tangle of weeds. But to Alara, it was the most beautiful sight in the world. She met the agent, a young man named Ben who was clearly unsure what to make of this frail, determined woman. She walked through the empty rooms. They smelled of dust and loneliness. But the front bedroom, the one with a large window, it had a perfect, unimpeded view of 224 Maple Street. "I'll take it," Alara said, her voice quiet but final. Ben blinked. Don't you want to discuss the price? The inspection?" "No," she said, her eyes fixed on the window. "I have the funds. Draw up the papers." The move was her secret D-Day. She hired movers herself. She gave the administration at Golden Year's 30 days' notice, stunning them into silence. When David found out, his reaction was exactly as she'd predicted, relayed through a series of frantic, increasingly angry phone calls. "Mom, have you lost your mind? You can't live alone. What about your fall? What about your medication?" "I am 80 years old, David," she said calmly, holding the phone away from her ear slightly. "If I wish to break my hip in my own home, that is my divine right." "Your home?" "Mom, that's a new house. It's unfamiliar. It's across the street from your old house. It's creepy. What are you trying to prove?" "I am not trying to prove anything," she replied, her voice like smooth, cold stone. "I am simply coming home." And so, Alara took possession of 221 Maple Street. The first night she slept on a camp bed in the front room, wrapped in an old quilt. She felt a peace she hadn't known in years. The silence here was different. It was her silence. It was filled with the potential of her own thoughts, not the hollow hum of institutional living. She was home. And from her strategic vantage point, the war of poetic justice could begin. The first phase of her campaign was one of observation and subtle influence. She became a fixture, a harmless old lady across the street. She hired a local boy to tend the garden, and she directed him with the precision of a general. She wanted a garden that was not just beautiful, but iconic. She planted old-fashioned roses, the kind that filled the air with a heavy, intoxicating perfume. She planted lavender and sage. She resurrected the flower beds until they were a riot of color and scent, a perfect, pastoral postcard. She would sit on her porch in a rocking chair Arthur had restored, a blanket over her knees, and she would watch. She saw the frantic pace of her old house. Chloe, the new mother, always looking harried, always rushing. The husband, Mark, leaving early, coming home late. And little Leo, a toddler of boundless energy and a heartbreaking smile. Her children's visits to the new family were her intelligence briefings. David would come over on Saturdays, always with a new, useless gadget for the house. A high-tech doorbell, a smart thermostat. He was playing the role of the successful, helpful son for this new audience. Sarah would visit with casseroles and hand-me-down baby clothes, basking in the glow of her own generosity. Ilara would watch them come and go, her face a placid mask. They would always glance over at her house, their movements stiff, uncomfortable. They never waved. They never crossed the street. It was as if she were a ghost they were desperately trying to ignore. Her revenge was not to be loud or violent. It was to be a quiet, persistent reminder. A haunting by presence. Her first direct action was the porch light. The old porch light at 221 was a weak, yellow thing. She had it replaced with a brilliant modern LED fixture that cast a pure, white, penetrating light. It illuminated her own porch, but it also threw a sharp, unmistakable beam directly into the front windows of 224, specifically into the master bedroom. She kept it on all night. A week after it was installed, she saw Mark standing at his window late one night, staring out, pulling the curtains tight with an irritated jerk. A small, satisfied smile touched Ilara's lips. A minor nuisance. An itch they couldn't quite scratch. Her next move was auditory. Arthur had been a jazz enthusiast, and he'd owned a magnificent old record player and a collection of vinyl that was now stacked in her new living room. She chose her records with care. Not the loud, upbeat numbers. The slow, mournful ballads. The ones Arthur had loved to play on rainy afternoons. A trumpet's lonely cry, a singer's bluesy lament. She would open her front windows and let the music drift across the street on the evening air. It was never loud enough to be a noise complaint. It was just there. A whisper of the past, a soundtrack of a life they had discarded. She saw Chloe pause once while unloading groceries, her head tilting, a strange, wistful look on her face as a Stan Getz saxophone solo curled around her. It was a feeling, not a sound. A ghost in the air. The true escalation began with the bench. She paid to have a beautiful wrought iron bench installed on the public sidewalk, right at the edge of her property, but facing directly towards 224. She claimed it was for her to rest on during walks. But she rarely sat on it. Instead, it became a stage. She began to befriend Leo. It was shockingly easy. He was a curious, lonely child, often left to play in the fenced yard while his mother was busy inside. Ilara would sit on her porch, and when he looked over, she would give a small, gentle wave. One day, she was in her front garden, carefully pruning a rose bush. Leo was at his fence, watching. "Hello," she said softly. He just stared, his thumb in his mouth. "That's a very fine truck you have there," she said, nodding to the plastic toy in his other hand. He held it up. "V-Room." She smiled a genuine smile for the first time in a year. "My husband, Arthur, he loved trucks. Big ones. He could tell you everything about them." She didn't approach him. She simply went back to her pruning. The next day, he was there again. This time, she had a small, weathered teddy bear. It had been David's. She placed it on the fence post. "This fellow looks like he needs some sunshine," she said to no one in particular, and went inside. Through the window, she watched Leo's mother come out, see the bear, look suspiciously across the street, and then, with a shrug, give it to Leo. The child clutched it, delighted. This was the crack in the fortress. Through Leo, she began to talk to Chloe. It started with simple, neighborly warnings. "Your sprinkler is leaking a bit near the foundation," she'd call out, her voice friendly. "Arthur always said that could cause real problems if it's not fixed." Chloe, surprised, would thank her. Then, the stories began. They were offered as harmless anecdotes, little pieces of neighborhood history. But each one was a carefully crafted dart. One afternoon, as Chloe was wrestling with a delivery, Ilara approached, leaning lightly on her cane. "Oh, that big maple in the front," Ilara said, pointing to the magnificent tree that shaded the yard. My Arthur planted that the day we found out I was pregnant with our son, David. He said a boy needs a strong tree to climb. She sighed, a sound full of old sorrow. David loved that tree. He used to build forts under its branches. It's a shame he was in such a hurry to sell the place. I think he's forgotten how much that tree meant. Chloe froze, the package in her hands. I didn't know that. Oh yes, Ilara said sweetly. There's history in that soil. She turned and walked back to her house, leaving Chloe staring at the tree, then at the retreating figure of the old woman, a new, uncomfortable thought now planted in her mind. The stories continued. She told Chloe about the rose bushes by the kitchen window, how she'd planted them the year her daughter, Sarah, had gone away to college. She said the house felt too quiet without me puttering in the garden. I suppose some things don't change. The implication was clear. Sarah had found the house quiet then, and had found it easy to leave her mother in a quiet place now. She was rewriting the narrative of the house for its new occupants. It was no longer just a beautiful property. It was a place steeped in the love of a mother and a father, and the subsequent betrayal of their children. She was turning the very walls of 224 into witnesses for the prosecution. David and Sarah felt the shift. Their visits became more strained. They could see the familiar, unsettling sight of their mother across the street, a constant, silent accuser. They saw her talking to Chloe, and they knew, with a sickening certainty, what she was saying. They tried to counter it. David came over one Tuesday evening, marching across the street with his jaw set. He didn't come to the door. He stood on her lawn, a stranger on her green. "Mom, this has to stop," he said, his voice tight. Ilara stood on her porch, a queen on her dais. "Stop what, David?" "You know what." Talking to Chloe. Telling her stories. "You're trying to turn them against us." "I'm simply sharing the history of the home they live in," she said innocently. "I would think you, of all people, would appreciate history. You were so eager to be done with mine. This isn't about history. This is about you poisoning things. It's not healthy. For you, or for anyone." "My health is excellent. Thank you for your concern," she replied. "The air over here is much better than at that facility you picked for me." His face reddened. "We did what we thought was best." "No," Ilara said, her voice dropping, losing all pretense of sweetness, becoming cold and sharp as flint. "You did what was most convenient. There is a difference." He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time in years. Not as his fading mother, but as a formidable opponent. He turned and walked away, defeated. The confrontation with Sarah was more emotional. She came over weeping, playing the wounded daughter. "How can you do this to us, Mom?" "To me. We love you. We were worried about you." Ilara looked at her daughter, at the performative tears. "When I was in the hospital after my fall," Ilara said quietly, "the nurse asked me for my next of kin. I gave her your name and number, Sarah. She called you. Do you know what you said?" Sarah's tears stopped, frozen by the sudden, specific memory. "You said, 'I'm in a meeting. Can it wait?'" Ilara's voice was a whisper, but it filled the room. "Love doesn't say, 'Can it wait,' Sarah. Convenience does." Sarah fled, sobbing for real now. Ilara felt a pang, an old maternal cord being severed with a clean, painful slice. But she did not relent. The final, brilliant piece of her revenge was the treasure hunt. She knew, from her observations, that Mark was an avid gardener, frustrated with the mediocre soil in the backyard. One day she mentioned to Chloe casually, "You know, Arthur was always burying things back there. His time capsules, he called them. Little metal boxes with coins, or a newspaper from the day. He said it was for the future." She chuckled. "I think there are still a few back there by the old oak tree." He was so forgetful in his later years. She saw the spark of excitement in Mark's eyes when Chloe told him. That weekend, he was out there with a shovel, digging with a fervor she hadn't seen in him before. He didn't find any time capsules. But he did find something else. Something Ilara had paid a handyman to bury deep in the night, weeks before. It was a small, locked metal box. Inside, when they pried it open, was not a treasure. It was a collection of documents. Photocopies of the financial statements from the sale of her house, with David's executor fees highlighted. A copy of the brochure for golden years, with the exorbitant monthly cost circled. And a single handwritten letter, in Ilara's elegant script. It was not an angry letter. It was a love letter to Arthur. It spoke of their life in the house, of the dreams they'd built, of the children they'd raised. And it ended with these words: "I fear, my dear Arthur, that the children we loved so much see me not as a person, but as a problem to be solved. They speak of my safety, but I hear only the clinking of coins. They have sold our home out from under me, Arthur. They have sold our memories. And in doing so, I fear they have lost a part of their own souls. I feel so very alone." It was a masterpiece of poetic justice. She had made them dig up their own betrayal. She had planted the evidence of their moral failure in the very soil of the home they had taken from her. The fallout was immediate and total. Chloe and Mark were horrified. The romantic history they'd been sold by David and Sarah was a lie. The sweet old lady across the street was not a bitter crank, but a grieving widow cast out by her own flesh and blood. The dynamic shifted irrevocably. The friendly waves stopped. The invitations for coffee ceased. David and Sarah were now pariahs on the street that held their mother's legacy. Ilara had won. She had exposed them. She had reclaimed her power not through shouting, but through silence, through stories, through the slow, patient weaving of a new truth. Winter came to Maple Street, draping the houses in a blanket of clean, white snow. It hushed the world, covering the scars of the autumn's battles. The brilliant LED light on Ilara's porch glinted off the icy crystals. The music from her house was softer now, more contemplative. She was sitting by her fireplace. The teddy bear Leo had secretly returned to her fence post. "For you, so you're not alone," a note from Chloe had said, sitting on the armchair opposite, when the knock came. It was not David or Sarah. It was Chloe. She stood on the porch, her face pale and serious. "May I come in, Ilara?" Ilara nodded and led her to the sitting room. The house was warm, filled with the scent of old books and wood smoke. It was a home, truly lived in. "I wanted to give you this," Chloe said, handing her a large envelope. "And to tell you that we're putting the house on the market in the spring." Ilara opened the envelope. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Pictures of Leo playing in the garden, of family barbecues on the patio, of Christmas mornings by the fireplace. They were pictures of a happy family, in her house. "Mark and we talked for a long time," Chloe said, her voice thick with emotion. "After we found the box. What your children did. It was wrong. This is your home. It will always be your home. And we felt like we were living in a crime scene. We couldn't enjoy it anymore, knowing its real story." Ilara looked at the photos, at the joy on the little boy's face. She saw that the house had indeed been loved. In a way, her revenge had protected it. It had exposed the lie and driven out those who would live in it under false pretenses. But it had also, unintentionally, driven out this young family who had simply been innocent buyers. "You don't have to leave," Ilara said, and she was surprised to find she meant it. "We do," Chloe said softly. "For us. This is your street, Ilara. Your story is written into every brick, every branch. We need to find a place where we can write our own." She stood to go, then paused. "Thank you. For the roses. And for showing me what it means to fight for your own life." After she left, Ilara sat for a long time, the photos spread around her. She had wanted to make David and Sarah feel her pain, her erasure. And she had succeeded. But in doing so, she had also shown a young woman what strength looked like. The circle was not what David had thought. It was more complex, more beautiful, and more painful. A few days later, on a crisp, cold afternoon, she saw them. David and Sarah, standing on the sidewalk in front of her old house. They weren't going in. They were just looking. They looked tired and older. The confidence they'd once carried was gone, replaced by a slumped weariness. Ilara put on her coat and her scarf and walked out onto her porch. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, watching them. They turned and saw her. The three of them, frozen in a silent tableau across the snowy divide. It was Sarah who broke first. A sob escaped her, a raw, unprotected sound. David put his arm around her, but his own shoulders were shaking. Ilara felt no triumph, no vindication. She felt a profound, bottomless sadness. This was the family she and Arthur had built. This was the love that was supposed to sustain her in her old age. Reduced to this, two grieving children and a mother who had weaponized her own heart. She took a slow, careful step down from her porch. Then another. She walked across the snowy lawn, to the wrought iron bench. She sat down, her gaze still on them. It was an invitation. A fragile, impossible bridge. For a long moment, they didn't move. Then, slowly, as if walking through deep water, they crossed the street. They stood before her, not as adversaries, but simply as themselves. Flawed. Human. "I'm sorry, Mom," David whispered, the words tearing from him. "I was wrong. I was so wrong." Sarah just cried, her face buried in her hands. Ilara looked at them, her children, the instruments of her deepest pain, and she saw, for the first time, their own. The fear of losing her, the burden of responsibility, the easy, corrosive path of convenience they had chosen. They had not been malicious. They had been weak. And in her strength, she had broken them. "I know," she said, her voice soft with an exhaustion that went down to the bone. "I know." She didn't say, "I forgive you." The words were too big, too cheap. The wound was too deep for a simple bandage. But the war was over. The revenge was complete. It had left no one unscathed, but it had, finally, brought the truth out into the clean, cold winter air. David and Sarah sat on the bench on either side of her. They didn't speak. They just sat, the three of them, watching the snow gently fall on the house on Maple Street. The past was a country they could never return to, but the present, in all its painful, honest clarity, was theirs to face. Together. Ilara had set out to rebuild her identity, not as a mother, not as a victim, but as a force of nature. And she had. But she discovered that identity is not a fortress to be defended alone. It is also a door that can, eventually, be opened. The house across the street would get new occupants someday, and Ilara would watch them. She would tend her garden. She would play her music. She would live out her days in the home she had chosen for herself. She had learned that revenge is not about hurting those who hurt you. It is about reclaiming the power they took. It is about rebuilding your own house, board by board, until you can stand inside it, strong and unafraid, and look out at the world through your own window. We spend our lives building homes for others, filling them with love and memory. But the most important home we will ever build is the one inside ourselves. And no one, no matter how close, can ever sell that out from under you.